The human body is a demonstration of the process of life. Life happens in many dimensions. But in every dimension, life gets dressed up into time and space by the formula demonstrated by the human body. And so everything in the human body is wisdom, is teaching, is a message from the infinite to the finite, from the source to the manifested individual. The manifested individual is going to create a model of reality based on the wisdom that he can discover from within the body. And the place where that wisdom is expressed is the body itself. It's the body that's the wisdom, and it's the body that's interpreting the wisdom. If not for the body, we wouldn't need an interpretation. We would be it. And so because we're in the body, we don't have access to knowing it. We have access to knowing what's written in the body. But the body itself reveals what it is we need to know. The shape, the form, the function of each organ teaches us the nature of life itself, how we become us. One of the major lessons of the body, one of the big demonstrations that it teaches us about life is the fact that we have to eat, the necessity for sustenance. The individual needs to interact with the collective in order to sustain his existence. The collective becomes alive in the inanimate, in the plant, in the animal, and the highest level of revelation, the place where the deepest contact takes place with the life force that dresses up us all, is within the humans. The humans are the highest demonstration, the most detailed, the most advanced, first by their existence, and then by their ability to understand their existence and therefore comprehend the message that is alive in all. And so the human needs sustenance from the other levels and from the human level in order to maintain his existence. And this is broken down into all the dimensions where a human exists. He exists in the physical, he needs physical food. He exists in the emotional, he needs emotional food. He exists in the mental, he needs mental food. On every level that he exists, he needs food in order to sustain his desire for participation, in order to remember that he cares. If a person doesn't have the food that he needs, he starts forgetting that he cares. He might not even want to be physical anymore. And when he eats, he remembers his physical, he becomes more. And therefore he sustains his existence. All the dimensions, which is represented by the organs and the limbs. The organs and the limbs are giving us access to different dimensions. We can access the dimensions of movement because we have the legs. We can access the dimensions of action. We have the hands. We can access the dimension of speech through the mouth and through the inner voice that learns to speak through listening to a human mouth. And then there is the speechless expression, which is also a form of speech, that is what's dressing up in the speech. All these are dimensions that we gain access to them through the vessels, which are the organs and the limbs, the body parts. For every body part, access to some type of a dimension. Physically, for example, with the legs, we can physically move. But spiritually, now that we know what movement is, this opens potentials in the soul that weren't previously present. Now that we can teach speech, this opens dimensions in the soul that weren't previously present. And speech opens all the dimensions. Because with speech, we can go to all dimensions if we can learn how to open speech, how to follow speech. The original speech, the nature of speech, not the specific speech that's being given to us now, but to follow speech to its root, to find the essence of speech, to know how to feed that force that speaks. What's the food that gives it more life? What does it need to sustain itself? Every organ needs its food. If the legs won't move, then they're not getting their food. There are going to be consequences. If the mouth doesn't speak, it's not getting its food. There are going to be consequences. Everything that's not getting its food, there are going to be consequences. A child, if it doesn't get attention, there are going to be consequences. The heart doesn't feel valuable. It's not getting its food. The food is the interest of the environment that this being should exist. That's the food for the heart. That's why she wants to be here. If there's interest in the fact that she wants to be here. If no one is interested in the fact that she doesn't want to be here. The child still remembers that. It remembers it in a physical way. The body responds. The adult already has many protections, many layers of how do you continue living when no one wants you? These are protective mechanisms. It's not the nature of the heart. This is because there is a part that hasn't received its food and it's no longer active, it's no longer participating. The parts that don't get fed, they cease to participate in the personality and in the decisions and in how we spend our energy and how we develop. In every culture, there are different parts that are being neglected and therefore they atrophy and they die out until no one in that culture understands that the human is supposed to exist in that dimension. No one has the sensitivity to know what is the right way of how we were designed to be, what is the right food that's going to feed each organ so that none of our angels disappear from their duties. The child knows it because of their nature, but they haven't realized the wisdom. They're not alive enough to know what it is that they have, therefore they can lose it so easily. If an adult would know what a child instinctively feels, then no one would be able to move him from there. But because the child is a child, they easily give away their treasures to things that seem to excite the senses because they're getting a biological experience and they're not realizing the real nature of it. They're following the sweet, even though it's only superficially sweet. Deep inside it might be very bitter. And so the child knows the food of his organs because when he receives the food, he glows. And when the food is taken, he is upset. the adult no longer remembers what the child instinctively knows. The child is going to give away his knowledge because he's not wise enough to understand what he already has in his possession, to understand the value of it, to understand the importance of it, the realness of actually knowing the nature of who you are and how you were designed to be. Life was not designed so that we are born sensitive and then we toughen up. We weren't meant to toughen up. The environment was meant to soften up. If the child needs to toughen up, it means this wasn't the intention of the designer. This was man-made. The designer doesn't want him to toughen up. The designer wants him as sensitive as possible to appreciate the beauties of what he created. If he toughens up, he sees less beauty. If he toughens up, certain parts of him that are very important and necessary are going to die. He will no longer know himself. He will no longer know his original nature, the sensitivities that are the language of the organs. Due to the situation that we are in, due to the ignorance that is plaguing humanity, we have to create a tough exterior. We have to be able to protect ourselves from the environment. But God forbid that our interior should toughen up. We're going to lose access to the source of life. We're going to lose access to the sensitivities that allow us to know how to interact with this experience that we're having. The interior has to remain gentle and sensitive, regardless of what's happening in the exterior world. That's our only direction. That's our only map. That's the only way to really know what's right. Is if all the sensitivities are fully in place. And so an environment that can't handle those sensitivities is a toxic environment. Someone is not complying with the nature of humanity. Someone is not complying with the will of the source. Therefore, we have to toughen up. That toughening needs to be external, because if it becomes internal, we lose access to the will that's creating us, to the nature of how He wants it to be. This is not our choice. This is our design. And yet we have to be careful, because once we have been traumatized, and we've all been traumatized, the wounds can confuse us about the real nature of our sensitivities. What are we really so sensitive to? It might appear like it's one thing, but really that's covering for another thing. Once we've toughened up, it's very hard to know what instincts to follow, because how do we know if these instincts are in line with our sensitivities, or these instincts are a result of our toughening up? And so then we require wisdom. We can no longer trust our instincts. Our instincts alone are not wise enough to guide us any longer, once trauma has been involved. If we weren't traumatized, our instincts are a direct map to heaven. If we have been traumatized, our instincts are a direct map to hell. Our instincts are going to protect us against the Almighty, but our instincts cannot protect us against the Almighty. The Almighty is on our side. Only then are we safe. If we are protecting ourselves from Him, then we are very not safe. And so if the external world has resulted in a toughened interior, if our relationship with the source has been affected by the toxicity of the environment, if we are toughening up with the source, we're moving away from our nature. We're moving away from heaven. Heaven is where we are fully our sensitive selves, and that is respected by all. Then what lives inside of us rejoices, and that's the experience of heaven. It appreciates its own existence as it was designed to do. But if certain parts of it are missing, if it no longer remembers itself, because the environment wasn't ready to contain it, then it descends into hell. Hell is where we imagine we're at conflict with the source. It's not possible. If we were at conflict with the source, we would cease to exist. It's not possible to be in conflict with the source. But it's certainly something we can believe about ourselves. And when we do, we descend into hell. Everything that we do, we're doing out of the wrong motivation. There isn't such a situation. It cannot be. And so this doing is creating an energy that's at conflict with its own existence. These are the scales of the soul. The soul who decides which organs are going to get their food. Based on the relationship with the Absolute, the soul is going to feed the organs. And this will appear in the behaviors, in the speech, in the thought patterns. It's all inclusive, it's all already there. The angels never miss. Speech can feed every organ, even the organs that require external stimulation. Speech can give some contribution, some type of sustenance to every organ. Speaking about that subject is already feeding that organ. If I speak about going, my legs are getting some type of sustenance, even though right now I'm not going. I'm giving them space within the soul. I'm reuniting them with the source of life. They are being remembered. If a human being gets remembered, then he knows. The remembrance happens within the one that's being remembered. That's the space, the location where this remembering is going to happen. When the organs get remembered by the soul, it heals the relationship. It brings more life. When we want something more, when we want the body to grow in any capacity, we work out that organ, we operate, we do. We manifest through that organ, and that brings more soul into the organ, and it grows. More desire, more life. The more we remember, the more we're getting remembered. the more we forget, the more we're being forgotten. It's the intelligence that remembers itself in us or forgets itself in us. It's always there, giving us life, giving us sustenance, but it's that intelligence that remembers itself in us and therefore knows to give in abundance to what's his, or that intelligence has forgotten and therefore it seems like he's giving to another, and to another he gives based on all kinds of conditions. Does the intelligence remember that it's doing it for itself, or does the intelligence imagine that it's doing it for another? These forms of sustenance, these foods that the organs require, this is where the blessing and the curse have their power. The blessing is an abundance of food, an satiated organ. According to the abundance, according to the accuracy, comes forth the blessing from the soul. This is the demonstration of the offerings, the sustenance that's required to each dimension in order to keep the soul active on that dimension, in order to keep the intelligence aware and invested in that dimension. And to each dimension, the soul brings blessing. The presence of the soul brings blessing. The awareness of the intelligence brings blessing. When something is forgotten, it is cursed. And when something is remembered, it is blessed. Because life is a process that's alive. And the more conscious the process that's alive, the more accurate the process that's alive, the more life comes forth. When the desire to give life is conscious, there's a blessing. When the desire to give life is unconscious, there's a curse. The desire to give life is conscious within the one that's receiving life. If it's not conscious there, it's not conscious anywhere. Just like the plants and the animals receive their sustenance without consciousness. They're given to the hands of nature, they're given to the hands of a process that is intelligence. It's a demonstration of intelligence as it relates to the whole, but it seems foolish as it relates to the individual parts. Within the human being, there's the ability to bring intelligence by making it conscious. And then the wisdom is demonstrated on the individual level. It's not just an intelligence that can explain the coexistence of the parts. It's an intelligence that reveals the meaning, the importance of every part that is present within the entire process. It's an intelligence that makes everything dependent on everything. And that's how they all coexist in peace. And that's the demonstration of the intelligence itself. The desire for it to be so is revealed by it being so. And what is so intelligent that it demonstrates the intelligence of the designer. And so the more the will that gives life is conscious within the one that's receiving life, the more life is being received. The more accurate is the intelligence within that life, because life and intelligence are coming from the same source, in the same quantities. Life and intelligence are identical, because the intelligence is the demonstration of the aliveness. How do we know that he is so alive? Because look, he designed a body that has so many different parts and everything interacts with everything, and he created a formula for that that works perfectly in order to project consciousness, allow for intelligence that can create speech. And so this demonstration, the existence of it by itself, is the language that demonstrates the aliveness, the depth of awareness, the unlimited processing power that is the one that decided on it being so. If we see a demonstration of human behavior, and accordingly we understand their intelligence, infinitely more so when we see the creation and we see its intelligence, and we understand the depth of comprehension of the one who intended for it to be so. And the one who intended it for it to be so, he intended for it to be just so. There's something perfect about the way that it is that wouldn't be so perfect in any of our ideas. There's nothing that we can come up with and say, well, if this was different, it would be better. If we would know more about the design, we would realize that no, nothing could have been different and it would have been better. It shows the optimal version of what it decided to make. It comprehended the entire nature of what it was creating, and it decided on it just so, with the full presence of mind, with the full desire and commitment. Nothing was left unthought, nothing was left unsaid, nothing was left uninvestigated. What we're supposed to do with it is waiting for us to return to the design. What we're doing with it, there's something very wrong with that. But the way it was designed, there couldn't have been any detail that could have been made better in any way. Not possible. If it seems that way, we simply haven't comprehended the nature of the design. And so by this design, we learn about our dimensions by knowing how to feed each dimension. If something feels good or bad, we are being triggered in a certain dimension. What is this dimension that caused us to feel good? What is this dimension that caused us to feel bad? Which organ is being triggered? What is the desire I have for it to be so? And what is the pain I have if it's not so? Where is it entangled within my being that makes me care, that makes me even know that that's a thing? all these dimensions, this is the chosen form. This is the optimal form. This is the perfection that includes an entirety, not only in us, in our bodies, in every world, in every dimension, there is this form that causes the manifestation of that dimension to be just as it is. The same form is used in all worlds, in all locations, in all levels of perception. This is the demonstration of the body, the demonstration of divinity, the divine form. The divine form is the form of everything. The divine form is the microcosm that represents the entire macrocosm. And so these foods, the desires of the organs, and what causes offense to the organs, this is the nature of the divine language. This is the nature of the holy tongue. The organs in every dimension. The organs are responsible for the dimensions. The organs exist in each dimension. In each organ, all the other organs are represented in that dimension. Each organ manifests its production using the same formula, the divine form. In each organ, the entire body is represented in its own way, in its own language. And so the blessing is the sustenance, and the curse is the lack of sustenance, and therefore the elimination. The dimension where the divine form is most revealed in the world of the senses is the dimension of sound, where speech is present. Speech reveals the intelligence more than any of the elements, because the imagination can cover the external world to seem like everything is random, like there is no wisdom that's tying it all together. But through words, we can discover the meaning, the relationship, the associations between the parts. And that reveals the wisdom the most. This is what gives glory to the one who desired it so. To speak his praise, to raise his glory, is to recognize his wisdom. If one thinks he's foolish and he comes to sing him praise, then of course the one singing is the fool. The praise is not going to be received. He is not looking for flattery. He is looking for an earnest recognition of the nature of what he designed, of his intentions, so that we can understand the wisdom that decided for it to be so that we can surrender to the depth of its all-pervading intelligence. And so through flattery, we can only fool ourselves. If we don't appreciate the wisdom, we are in extreme danger. Because life is going to present to us all kinds of situations, and we don't have an accurate language how to digest those situations. we don't have the proper distinctions to know how to keep a tough exterior while still keeping our sensitive interior. If we will understand the needs of our organs, if we will understand the nature of the sustenance that they require, then we can stay healthy within, even when there is chaos without. If we don't know how to identify, then what's happening outside is going to impact the inside. The inside is not going to receive the right sustenance. The outside is not going to give it. They don't even know. They're not up to there. And so if there is no understanding from the inside, what's going on the outside is going to deteriorate the sensitivity from the inside. And then the outside is the inside. There's no longer anyone else that can represent some semblance of truth. There's no longer anyone else that remembers the real nature of compassion. There's no longer anyone else that knows what should have been happening here, to know how to feel about what is happening here. And so we have to discover by listening. And once certain parts are missing, we won't even hear them. Even when we're listening, we're going to have to learn the nature of our body, learn the nature of man, learn to connect to real wisdom in order to know the parts that have been taken from us, that need sustenance in order to be revived. When everything is revived, then there is balance, then there is unity, then we can get closer to being fully alive. If we become fully alive, then the one giving us life knows that he is alive. The place where he knows it is inside of us, and that's called liberation. That's the destiny of every human being. When the time when our ignorance will come to an end will arrive. And then everything that happened to us, all the questions that we had, will have no context. We will understand that that conversation was taking place from a place that wasn't human. A human doesn't really have those questions. It's just that when a human is missing parts, he doesn't think like a human. And then he wonders who he is. He doesn't remember. He doesn't have the right sensitivities to know himself. And then the result is suffering, and that suffering brings the questions. But the answers are not answers to questions, the answers are changes in the levels of life, in the aliveness. When there's more aliveness, the questions that happened in suffering no longer appear.